Welcome, everyone, to our second roundtable of Will You Hear Me Now? And Will You Hear Me Now is our platform in which we give young people a voice about important issues that are affecting them, most importantly, gun violence and gun violence in schools. So this summer has been a lot of things happening. There have been two Supreme Court decisions on the Second Amendment that have been handed down. There has been an assassination attempt, and we're in the middle of a convention. And so we wanted to bring some young people together and just have them talk about their feelings on the Supreme Court decisions and the assassination attempt and anything else they want to talk about with gun violence. Um, so we invited Catherine Schweit to lead the conversation. She is a former Chicago prosecutor, a retired FBI special agent, and she created the FBI's active shooter program after Sandy Hook. And she teaches now at DePaul University College of Law. And her company, Schweit Consultant, provides security guidance to schools, businesses, and government clients. She does have a podcast, Stop the Killing, and it is based on her book, Stop the Killing: How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. So Catherine is a prolific author. She is a lawyer, a former FBI agent, and a good friend of ours at Will You Hear Me Now? So, Catherine, I'm going to throw it to you, and you can have the participants introduce themselves and take it from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Technology. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and I appreciate the opportunity. This is obviously, gun violence is obviously a topic that's really important and something, it's my mission. It's pretty much all I talk about and work on these days. So I thought it would be valuable. Our time is limited. We know your time is valuable. We want to hear from these young voices. So I thought we'd start with a baseline of understanding that federal and state legislatures pass laws, but the courts, including the US Supreme Court, decide whether our laws meet our values and whether or not what we interpret, I would say, how we would feel they interpret the US Constitution. The decisions made at the higher courts come from the lower courts and flow forward. So today, I wanted to talk to you about some questions that will discuss the same types of issues that my law students struggle with. And I ask them to grapple with these issues, and I want them to be reflective as I would like you to be reflective in a way and challenge you to inform legislators and politicians, policymakers, and the influencers. So I would like to start out, that said, with my first question for today's panel. But first, I'd like them to introduce themselves. So if I could get a name from individuals and then you guys know how to do this, right? So give me a name, tell me what grade you are in school if you're comfortable doing that, and what area of the country you live in. And I'm gonna ask one of you to start. Gavin, how about if you start and then the rest of you join in?
Hello, I'm Gavin. I am going to be a freshman in college this year, and I am from Pennsylvania.
Jump in there, ladies.
Hi, I'm Sarita. I'm going to be a sophomore in high school this year, and I live in New York.
Everybody
Hi.
hesitates.
Sorry. I'm Meher. I am a senior in high school and I live in Texas.
I'm Olivia. I'm a seventh grader and I'm in California.
Hi, I'm Anya. I'm a 10th grader and I live in New York.
Hi, I'm Ananya. I'm going to be a sophomore and I live in New York.
Hi, I'm River and I live in Michigan and I'm a seventh grader.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to jump right into the first question and ask you this, understanding these facts. 16 years ago, the US Supreme Court set aside 100 years of precedent and decided in the decision DC versus Heller to change the standards for gun ownership in the United States. They reinterpreted the Second Amendment to expand the rights of individuals to owning, so individuals could own guns for personal use beyond what we think of traditionally as military and law enforcement duties. Many states then took the opportunity to pass state laws that expanded their gun laws and significantly loosened those gun laws in the process. Does this make you feel more or less safe, and why? First out of the box, Sarita.
I think it makes me feel less safe. I think there's something to be said about how quick states are willing to exploit amendments to federal laws to relax their own. And we've seen how detrimental gun violence can be, and we've seen how it can tear apart families and communities. So I think the fact that we are so quick to increase accessibility to firearms is very scary.
Scary, is that a good word? How do the rest of you feel about that? Gavin, how do you feel about that?
I think scary is accurate. There's no need to arm every citizen in the country. That's not what the founders intended when they first put up the Second Amendment. The Constitution as amended, the words that they use is a well-regulated militia, and to secure the free state. So by stating that the Second Amendment protects individuals' amendment rights to buy firearms, you're opening the door for gun violence.
Now, that's an interesting point. You say you're opening the door for gun violence, but ladies, River, how about that? Is a gun automatically mean gun violence? Go ahead, Olivia.
I honestly feel like it depends on the person who's, owning the weapon in the first place, because I see gun ownership. I feel like owning a gun is more of a privilege rather than a free gift we should be giving to anyone, especially those that may not be trusted with that weapon or may not have earned that privilege.
Now, River, you live in a state that has dealt with a lot of gun violence, and they have made some changes to their gun laws, but it's a big hunting state, Michigan. What do you think?
Personally, for me, knowing that I live in a state where hunting is a big activity and is also, dare I say it, a normal activity, it makes me feel less safe knowing that there could be somebody who maybe doesn't use a hunting rifle in the right way, maybe, and also it does make me feel a little less safe that also somebody could have a gun on, like, in their car, and knowing that they could claim that they're using their gun for hunting and then pull somebody over on the side of the road and try to shoot them and rob them. So for me, it's laxing the gun laws in a hunting state doesn't make me feel very safe.
Ananya?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to provide a contrast to that, where I live in New York, and so I think that it's very different here because they're very strict with gun laws compared to other states. And I think that I've kind of been feeling very grateful, especially recently, that I'm able to live in a state that's more secure in terms of guns. And I also kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of I think it's very telling how I feel when I'm in school, because I think that in terms of lockdown drills, I think I feel a sense of security, and I'm happy that I get to feel like there's no real point to the lockdown drills because my state provides such secure laws in terms of gun violence that the likelihood of that really happening is so low. And I think that it's just really sad that in terms of other states, so Michigan, where those gun laws might not be as strict, or as enforced. I think that it's really sad that a lot of kids have to live in fear.
So now that's interesting because you're saying that the security you feel, in fact, some states, when the state lawmakers after these Supreme Court decisions, they tightened their gun laws, and some states did that, and you're saying it makes people feel safer, including having the ability to get some of the training at school to understand it better. Now, Maher, you wanted to say something? You're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, so
Thanks.
I think that a lot of the times people use the justification for carrying firearms as saying it makes you safer because you have that like form of self-defense. But I feel like the entirety of that reasoning kind of feels circular to me, because sure, it's important to have self-defense, but at the point at which like a lot of the major attacks that we need self-defense to protect us from come from like mishandling guns, it feels very counterintuitive to almost like relax this legislation instead. And it's very circular in the sense that you're allowing more people to have guns, which allows for them to defend themselves against more people having guns. And I feel like if you're able to take gun violence out of the equation, you allow for better prioritization of other threats to personal protection. So I feel like these legislations make me feel safer as a whole, because I see that people are willing to put the protections for the youth.
I like that. I like that. Those are great comments. But I'm wondering, maybe, how do legislators tell legislators how they could deal with both protecting the right of somebody who wants to hunt, like in Michigan or in upstate New York or in Montana, with the right of somebody to feel safe in their house or driving down the street, like River mentioned? What would you say to a legislator about the laws that they should think about changing or passing or enacting or withdrawing in order to give you a better sense of security for your state, for instance? Not that you have to speak directly to your legislators, but please do. Is that a tough question? So if it's a tough question, go ahead, Gavin.
I think similar to what we have for school zones, where firearms would be banned in school zones, having that for more public places, malls and such would be great. Maybe just having almost a reverse, instead of like gun-free zones, we have specific zones where you're allowed to use guns, like hunting areas would be an example, or perhaps just private property. I think it's a fair middle ground.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Certainly, some would say you can carry a gun anywhere, and I would say I've been in an airport. You can't. So certainly the laws aren't quite as clean as everybody thinks. Ananya?
I think even more so, it's just a lot of regulations around specific people who can and can't, maybe like doubling down on the process to actually get a license to carry a gun. Because I think that so many people that we see nowadays who carry guns, they use it for the wrong purposes. And I think that a lot of that just kind of roots back to the people who actually give them permission to use these guns. And I think that it's important that more background checks are done on these people. We kind of like look more to like psychology and other forms of like ways to check out that these people are actually like able to carry guns, and that we can trust that they won't harm our communities if we put these in their hands.
Okay, I like that. Anya, you want to add something real quick?
Yeah, I think that many people who have guns don't like purchase them or own them with the intent of doing anything initially bad with it. But I think that other factors such as like mental health can contribute to what they end up doing with them. So other resources such as like mental health facilities and things like that can help them make better decisions when they are like owning guns and dealing with them.
No, and those are good points. The legislative changes that were made by the White House and the legislature in the past year did include a lot more funding for mental health assistance, specifically to help combat gun violence that might be triggered by mental health issues. I wanted to ask So Sarita, go ahead. I wanted to move on to another quick question. I wanted to add a little bit more layers, but go ahead. What would you like to say?
I was just gonna say that like recently the Supreme Court overturned a ban on bump stocks,
Right.
which I think would, if that was still enacted, I think it would have been a good way to prevent shootings or mass shootings. But now that it's gone, it's definitely regressed us in terms of fighting the gun crisis. So I think by like upholding a ban on bump stocks would have been a really good way in a really good step in the right direction in the fight against gun violence.
I think this really speaks to the idea of what is the legislature's job, what is the court's job, and the court struggles with that, as does the legislature. And then in the case of the bump stock case, the court said the legislation that was passed doesn't say something that alters a mechanism that alters the speed of the rounds being discharged in a weapon. So since the legislation that was passed just says an automatic weapon, we're not going to interpret that to mean when another piece of equipment is applied. So the Supreme Court was using a strict construction of its interpretation of legislation. However, that allows the legislature to then modify the law. And that's really, I think then maybe that's the voice that you want to have for your legislators to say, we want that bump stock item removed. Out of circulation, we want legislation that does that. We want a modification in legislation. And that's what the court really said, is go about it in that way. Let me expand it further and point out that this past summer, we also saw a decision, it was in July, in US versus Rahimi. And the Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment isn't absolute and that guns could be removed from a domestic abuser in certain circumstances. Now, those who advocate for those who are abused domestically hailed this as a victory. But if you read the court's decision, the court was not in unanimous agreement on that. And I will say that the reason is some who opposed it on the court said that shouldn't take away somebody's right to carry a gun. Domestic abuse is not the right to carry, it shouldn't interfere with their right to carry a gun. So upcoming cases could absolutely result in striking down federal statutes that currently exist that prohibit felons and drug users, just like domestic abusers, felons and drug users from owning guns. So if the federal law is stricken down for felons being able to own a gun or drug users being able to own a gun, is that something that violates privacy, which some people would say, or do you think that that's a good thing? Because is it violating somebody's privacy if you leave the law to remain, or is it something that you think the court shouldn't do because that will put guns into the hands of prior felons and drug users? What do you think? Do you agree with those potential risks with the court's decisions? I'm not saying that right. Stick with me on it. Olivia, what do you have to say?
So I honestly, let me just break that question down a bit. I personally, let me just relate this with an analogy. Let's say a teacher's going to give out like a reward to every student that gets an A or an A+. Yet there's that one student that gets an F. Should they get the reward in that case? And I'm relating this to, should you give guns, should you take the right to own a gun away from a domestic abuser? And personally, to me, it doesn't make sense because, as I said in an earlier answer, owning a gun is more of a privilege. It's more like that reward. And it doesn't make sense if they haven't earned the rights, to own a gun. If they haven't earned that privilege, they should not be able to own it. And we even have some proof that they could actually misuse the gun intentionally. So I do feel like that minimizes safety.
So Olivia's position is that owning a gun should be a privilege, so you don't get one either way, which of course the court is saying you have a right to own a gun, and there are only certain situations where we should be able to take the gun away from somebody. Ananya?
I just kind of want to connect that to the sort of like tone deafness and insensitivity that like usually surrounds gun violence and mass shootings in this country. Because I think that when you have a domestic abuser and you continue to allow them to be in possession of a weapon, knowing that this person is not well, and like knowing that this person is fully capable of doing mass destruction and hurting a lot of people, I think that that just basically shows that a lot of the lawmakers in this country just don't care for the safety of our people. And I think that the fact that people on the Supreme Court who are responsible with passing laws that protect our citizens, I find that very disappointing. And I think that that just goes to show that in this country, we need to take more steps to actually be able to protect people. And I think that that's another big thing that, like, it is happening in this like current election, just to tie to things that are really happening right now, because we see so many people kind of weighing in on gun violence and kind of considering which candidate will actually value their safety. And I just think that it's a really big topic that forces us to kind of look to our lawmakers to help protect us in this case.
So, and just to clarify, I know you were speaking, I want to make it clear that you know that the legislature passes laws, not the Supreme Court. I think it was just a misspeak on your part. So yeah, everybody, you know that. And I just wanted to make that clear, that in case anybody else is listening. I wanted to ask River, what do you think about this idea of domestic abusers and the idea of taking leaving guns in some domestic abusers' hands or take them away? Same thing with felons, same thing with drug sellers or drug users. Is there a correlation between drug users and felons and gun use?
Honestly, I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question, but the felon could have committed the said crime with a gun on drugs. So,
right.
Or if the felon, sorry, can you repeat the question?
So like if the felon, for instance, was a bank embezzler who stole money from the bank, embezzled money from the bank where he worked, then he's a convicted felon. He has nothing to do with drugs and he didn't use a gun to do it. Should his gun be taken away? I think this is one of the issues that the court would consider.
Well, if he didn't use the gun, then why is the gun being taken away from him? That's what doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and right now it would be, because if he's a convicted felon, you can't own a gun. That's the federal law right now. And I think that's part of one of the kinds of issues that might come before the court. Because right now, under the law, you had a felony, you don't get to use a gun ever again. You don't get to hold a gun ever again. Certain drug convictions, the same thing. Certain mental health issues, the same thing. What I'm hearing from you is maybe there's a disconnect.
For me, I do agree that there is a disconnect. If they weren't involved, if a gun wasn't involved, you shouldn't take their gun away. That's what I think. But the fact that the court is taking their gun away and they didn't use the gun, it really makes me wonder if they're just trying to come up with a punishment and not. It makes me wonder if they're just trying to come up with a punishment that they feel would be right. But I feel like you need to directly punish them instead of just taking their gun away. Like
someone gets 5 years for doing a crime where they steal money from the place where they're working, and then they do their time, and that should be it. Not the idea that for the rest of their life they can't have a gun. You may see that decision out of the court sometime in the next year. Sarita, you wanted to chime in, and I wondered if the rest of you guys agreed with that. Sarita?
I was thinking the opposite, just because if you are a convicted felon, it means that you've demonstrated irresponsibility before.
I might say I've demonstrated irresponsibility.
Irresponsibility when it's like concerning the law, like you have directly violated a law. So I don't think that, because like Olivia said, having a gun is a privilege, and I don't think that you should have, like, as a convicted felon, you should have access to that, especially since you've you're a felon, you've committed felonies before, whether they're dangerous or not, whether it's just embezzling or like fraud or something, it means that you did something wrong and you should have the privilege of having a gun, which is a weapon, taken away from you.
Maher, do you agree with that?
Um,
Maher, go ahead.
So I definitely feel like it's a push forward in terms of stopping the prominence of gun violence, because a domestic abuser that's utilized either a firearm or some other like sort of harm to spread violence should definitely face like repercussions for their actions. And not only does this like kind of serve as like a disincentive from committing those crimes in the first place, but also it just kind of like decreases the amount of gun circulations overall. But I also feel like the law could be like a little bit better, or like the legislation, because it fails to firstly solve for the fact that like not all domestic abusers come from like the incentive to use gun violence directly for like harm, but also it fails to kind of like solve for the root of the problem, because guns shouldn't be taken away after the lives are lost and the acts of abuse have already been committed. It should be like long before. And on issues such as gun violence, I think it's very important to be like very proactive versus then being like reactive.
Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing too is you're saying, take the gun away from somebody before something bad happens. And there certainly are laws that are being passed, and we're thinking about ways that we can do that. And I think we also have a big responsibility individually to be aware of that. But legislation can be passed in different states that might have an impact on that. And I know, Anya, I wanted to give you the last word before I went on to the next question.
I was just gonna say that I think this question is like pretty complicated because it does have something to do with just, it's like the Second Amendment, it's a right. You have like a right to hold a gun. And just because you commit a crime doesn't mean that you shouldn't. But safety is a bigger issue than, it's like the safety of the general public. So at like what point is it okay to take a gun from someone when it is a right no matter what they have done? But I do think that maybe something like a probation would be better, because at the end of the day, it is a right. And no matter what someone did, I still think that there is some type of redemption that can go on. And although owning a gun shouldn't be like the goal of your like recovery or something from something like that, um the safety of the public is more important than being able to hold a gun.
I think that is a challenge, right? Is that when does the legislation protect civilians, and when do you have to put the rights of the civilians as a whole, the population as a whole, over the rights of an individual? And the courts historically have always had to weigh that balance when it comes to constitutional rights. So that's not a new story. It's just a kind of a newer story when it comes to guns. So I wanted to ask you this question, but before I did, how many of you are of voting age? Can you raise your hand? I see the darkness of Gavin down there in the corner. Right? Just one? Is that right? And me, I guess. And Mike, if he wants to, if he's not a felon. Just kidding. I wanted to ask this question. So I want to ask a voting person who votes and person who doesn't vote. So first, about 23% of eligible voters between the ages of 18 and 29 voted in the 2022 election, 23%. That was according to Tisch College researchers at Tufts University. So meanwhile, 70% of eligible voters over the age of 65 voted, 23% versus 70%. With the current 81-year-old president stepping back and ceding the race to a younger candidate to be the Democratic presidential candidate recently, do you think that younger people may in fact, or should in fact, be more inclined to come out and vote in greater numbers in November? And if so, why or why not? And I really would love to go first to our youngest, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but Olivia, I think you're the furthest from being able to vote. So I was wondering what you thought about this first, Olivia.
Yeah, so honestly, I feel like the new candidate has definitely piqued not only my interests, but a lot of other people's interests, simply because of how she, her kind of speeches and how she really sets the tone. her tone, I feel like, is more of inclusivity, you know, including everyone from different races, ethnicities, genders. Everyone feels included and welcome in the space. And that's something she really focuses on, which is also a common theme of the current generations with all this inclusivity and, you know, really letting people feel together and communicate easier. So I definitely feel like she has increased the voting participation.
Do you agree, Ananya?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, I think for me, I've been seeing a lot of people who have been like expressing that they were very unhappy with like Joe Biden's condition, especially as an older person. It was very evident in the moments kind of before he dropped out where he wasn't really fit to debate. And I think that a lot of people had a lot of issues with that. And they also felt very misrepresented because I think as the Democratic candidate, his views are obviously the most progressive. And I think that aligns with a lot of the younger people today. And
Do you
I think that
do you think there'll be a bigger turnout then?
yeah,
From
yeah.
younger
So
people?
I was gonna kind of say then that I think that with Kamala Harris entering the race, I think that her being just a younger person in general, she's able to better express the views that so many younger people today kind of carry with them. And I think that it's going to be really beneficial because now that people kind of feel like they truly do have a voice in this candidate and they truly do have someone who's advocating for what they want to see in terms of the country, I think that that's going to be really good because it encourages a lot of younger people to turn out to the polls. So,
Sarita?
Yeah, I like largely agree with what Ananya said. I think that with Biden, he was like 70 plus, and Trump is also 70 plus. So you have two older candidates on the ticket, and I think that that's what had a lot of people conflicted, especially Joe Biden being the older one. And with Biden dropping out and endorsing Kamala Harris, I think that that revitalized like a lot of young voters' eagerness to vote. One, because Kamala can like appeal to the younger people more, especially with um, the like campaigns that she's doing right now and what she stands for. But I also think that it's led people to kind of like decide between the two candidates, Trump and Kamala, in part because of how young she is too. So I think that it's definitely caused more young voters to engage in like the voting process more. And obviously, you know, it's encouraged that all people who are of age to vote should vote. So
Yeah, now, Gavin, you'll vote in this coming election, it sounds like. And I don't absolutely want you by any means to disclose who you might vote for. But do you think that the change in the horse, you know, in the races is going to make a difference on the turnout from people in your age group?
Absolutely. For a while there, I remember thinking back a few months back, I was like, you're voting for Trump or Biden. Unfortunately, I think if Trump were to win, I think he would end in a similar state to that Biden did at the end of his presidency. And if Biden won, I didn't know if he would survive to the end of his term,
Yeah, I just don't
unfortunately.
want to scare you, but actually they're only 3 years apart in age, but still, yeah.
Yeah. I was just like seeing where their mental state was with the debate.
Yes.
It was concerning. So at
Yeah.
least for Biden, I saw him hanging at the beach, not personally, just like through news. So I'm glad he's able to rest with his wife. It's good that we have a younger candidate up. I think it's a good way to get young people more involved again. It was really exciting to see that.
That's good. I've got Maher, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, like, candidates aside, whether it's like Trump, Biden, or Kamala, I think voting is like very, very important because some people downplay it, but especially because we live in a nation that's basically built on democracy, I think it's really important that people go out and like voice their opinions with which whatever means necessary. And especially with Gen Z, getting the chance to vote, like a lot of people in this election, I think they're really the delta, and they get to really decide what our future really looks like if they're able to like actually make sure that their voice is heard.
Yeah, you know, 100 plus years ago, 80% of the people would turn out to vote. So your generation, not your generation exactly, but this age group that was identified, 18 to 29, 23%, means most people basically just didn't vote. Anya, what do you think about that?
I also think that a bit of misogyny comes into play because she is a woman candidate on the Democratic side. And as Ananya said, this party tends to be a little more progressive. So I think that you will see more young voters come out. Also to help the fact that because she is a woman, it does say something to have a woman president when like history has shown there's only been ever male presidents. So I think that the fact that she is a woman and would be the first woman president may help get some young voters out, but it also may skew the way that older voters may vote if they think more traditionally.
So let me, you know, because I know we're running on time here. So I want to expand this just a little, same kind of subject area. But, you know, last month we had an assassination attempt on a former president. And it was not unlike the mass shootings that I've been working for my many years in law enforcement. So I was wondering for your ages, different than where we are. And when you think about electing and politics, electing people in politics, how do these moments of really deep collective national trauma impact your generation of voters in a way that maybe the older generations don't understand? You know, what are your thoughts about the direction the company is headed in, and how can it, you know, how can you convey your sense of personal safety? Tell me about your sense of personal safety and how that might impact your ability to vote and who you'd vote for. River?
Knowing that most, if not all of us here are still in school and may or may not still be vulnerable to a school shooting, it definitely impacts my personal safety. Knowing that there are still school shooters out there and people who are willing to enter, or maybe not quite willing, but and may enter a school and shoot a gun at us. It does impact my sense of personal safety with the and also it might impact us to vote for I can't vote, but I'm just saying
You will.
It might impact us to vote for somebody who will help with that national, or help us with our safety, and will hopefully focus on the gun violence and the mental health that may impact other kids following these events.
That makes sense. Gavin, do you want to chime in? You're on mute, Gavin.
On the note of school shootings, the shooter was young. The shooter was, I want to say he was younger than 21. I know that, or something like that. He was a young kid. The Trump shoot, the attempted assassin.
Oh yeah. Oh, he was in his 20s. But yeah, he was in his 20s.
That's right.
But yeah.
But he was reportedly bullied through high school. It's just scary to think that this is just a lone guy. He's going out, had an attempt. He was an inch away from ending a presidential candidate's life. And that's an important person. So for somebody to go into a school with far less security than the Secret Service, one person, that's really concerning that he can get that far.
Does show of hands, who here worries about their safety when they go into a school or a mall or a movie theater? Show of hands. Anybody? Something you don't think about as much. That's good to know. I like that. Anya, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to say like how I think political opinions aside, like no matter which candidate it could have been, I think that for me personally, I find it to be really sad that we're not really able to go to a political rally or a mass gathering to kind of be with a group of people that share the same beliefs as you, kind of be able to have a space where you truly feel comfortable. And I think that this experience, or this occurrence happening, I think that it's very telling of like the direction that our country is headed in terms of, you can tie it into so many things like gun violence, political views. And I think that it's really sad that our country is in a position right now where you're not even able to go to a mass gathering to be around people who you can be comfortable with and express familiar views with. And I think that the fact that our country lies so much on the principle of freedom, and you're not really able to be free in that sense, is really sad.
That's an excellent thought. That's an excellent thought. I believe this. Rita, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was
Sharita,
just
Olivia, and River, and then we're going to go to something else.
I was just gonna say that I feel like the attempted assassination on Trump really underscores the like political polarization that our country is facing right now. And I think the biggest thing about this attempt is that I hope that it's a wake up call for this country, because it seems that with every amendment to like legislature, we're like regressing in terms of our fight for against gun violence. So I really hope that this has kind of like bridged a gap between people who are for guns and people who are against guns. And I hope that it's shown people, no matter the side of, or no matter the beliefs you have on guns, that it can be very dangerous and it can wreak a lot of havoc. So there's something that needs to be done about it.
Yeah, I hate to see the conversation framed as for guns and against guns, because I do work in this area, and I think that's part of the challenge, is that when you want to talk to somebody about guns and gun safety, if you start out with, are you for guns or are you against guns? I think you really ended the conversation as soon as you did that. So I think that's when you say, when you comment like that too, I love that you bring that issue to the table, because we have to get better always with our words. And that's one of the values that we get in doing this, is you are sharing your emotions and your thoughts and your feelings about what you struggle with guns and gun violence in the United States. Olivia, you want to have a shot, so to speak?
I think really this is just more of a comment on how, think about how shocking this is that, Gavin was saying that he was like a high school student, and how at this point it's gotten to the point where anyone at any age could be, the next active shooter, and apparently attempt to assassinate an ex-presidential candidate. And at that point, it honestly feels maybe even a little bit scary at this point, that maybe that one kid I'm looking at when I'm going to school, I see, them walking by, could be the next active shooter, and I think it's really that element of surprise that it could be anyone is what really scares me the most about this.
Well, that's absolutely fair. River?
Kind of adding on to what Gavin and Olivia said about the young school shooters, and what I said about mental health. The fact that the mental health in our country, at least the way I feel, is that we struggle to mental health. The fact that somebody was willing to go out and as a high schooler and shoot at a president, it makes me wonder if this is something that maybe needs to be addressed more.
Whether they're getting any mental health assistance at all, and who is getting it, and how are they getting it, so that they don't get to that point. Is that what you're saying? I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. Yeah. That's a good point. Now I know we're running time here, and the engineer world is going to tell me to stop talking. That I wondered if there were questions that I didn't ask, or things we didn't talk about that you, as like you just did, Olivia. Is there something that you wanted to say Is there something you wanted to add today that you just felt like you needed to tell legislators? You needed to tell policymakers? What do you want to tell them? If there's something you want to tell them, I don't want to cut you off. Anything? Yeah, go ahead, River.
All that I wanted to say is that possibly we need to maybe focus a little bit more on mental health in our country to ensure that these school shootings and attempted assassinations don't continue.
Love it. Ananya?
I think I would want to make it clear to legislators that there's a lot of young people counting on them. And I think that if they plan to continue preaching the message that the younger generation is the future of America, I think that they need to do as much as they can to actually protect us and stop putting us in harm's way.
Love it. Okay. Anybody else on those things? Any other? You've got the legislators' ear right now. Anything you want to tell them? Okay. So I think that we're out of time, but I wanted to thank all of you and commend this whole group of amazing people for your really thoughtful dialogue and your contributions. This is a tough subject, and it's tough that you're living in it every day. And I just want to say on behalf of the American public and the older people in the world, we're sorry you have to deal with this at all in so many ways. But it's a good reminder, you know, that adults, particularly our country's leaders, need to listen to the voices of the young people in our country. You are our future, and I wish you a safe and productive school year. And when you can, vote. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. This has been an illuminating conversation, and it really is so important for us to know what young people are thinking. So often, the opinions of young people are just ignored, or there's sort of pat answers of thoughts and prayers and yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's so refreshing to hear what you have to say, because you have to say something that is meaningful, intelligent, impactful on your lives, and we want to hear it. And we want adults and lawmakers and policymakers to hear it. So what I'm going to say to the audience, if there is other topics that you think we would like us to talk to kids about, to young people about, please let us know. And you can go to willyouhearmenow.com and get more information. Until then, I'm Michael Finan, and it's been great to be with you today. And look forward to, and thank you, Kate, and thank you, everyone, for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.